The geysers of Yellowstone had been erupting on schedule for 10,000 years. Old Faithful never missed, never hesitated, never cared who was watching, until the morning something watched back. The signal hit every radio tower in Wyoming at 4:47 a.m. Not static, not interference, a pattern, deliberate, cold, repeating. And somewhere above the caldera, where tourists usually pointed at steam and called it magical, the sky cracked open like something had decided Earth's most famous national park was a good place to park. The United States government sent the military. The aliens sent a fleet. But nobody, not a single general, not a single alien commander, thought to check who was already there. The park rangers of Yellowstone had been managing 2 million acres of geothermal chaos, grizzly bears, tourist stupidity, and Wyoming weather since before most countries had armies. They had a saying up in the ranger stations: nature doesn't negotiate. Neither do we. If you think that's just a motto, keep watching. Like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what you think happens when aliens meet a man who once talked a bison out of a parking lot using only a granola bar and eye contact. This is their story, and it starts with a very bad morning for an alien empire that picked the wrong park. Ranger Dispatch Station 7 sat at the northeastern edge of Yellowstone National Park. Wedged between a pine forest that smelled like cold sap and a gravel road that hadn't been properly maintained since a snowplow incident nobody talked about anymore. Chief Ranger Dale Hatch arrived at 4:51 a.m., 4 minutes after the signal, because he'd been awake anyway. Dale was 53 years old, built like someone had stretched a tree stump into human shape, and operated on approximately 3 hours of sleep and 2 thermoses of black coffee per night. He had worked Yellowstone for 26 years. He had seen bison charges, wildfire spreads, a man try to cook eggs in a geyser vent, and one memorable July where 3 separate tour groups got lost simultaneously in different directions. He did not rattle easily. He looked at the sky through the station window. The crack in the atmosphere was still there, a shimmering seam of violet and pale gold, running north to south above the caldera like someone had unzipped the morning. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't aurora. It pulsed with something organized. Dale picked up his radio. "Dispatch, this is Hatch. You seeing what I'm seeing?" A pause. Then Ranger Connors, the overnight duty officer, came back. "Chief, we've got something on every sensor in the northern quadrant. Movement. Big movement, not wildlife." "How big?" Another pause. "Longer this time. Chief, the nearest comparison I can find in the database is the 2009 bison stampede near Lamar Valley, except this is coming from above." Dale set down his coffee. He picked it back up, he thought about it, then he keyed the radio again. "Wake everyone up, full muster, Station 7. And somebody call the Mammoth Hot Springs Visitor Center and tell them to close for the morning." "Reason?" Dale watched the seam in the sky pulse again, brighter this time. "Tell them we have an unscheduled atmospheric event." That was technically true. By 5:15 a.m., 11 rangers had assembled in the station's briefing room, which smelled like boot waterproofing and old maps. Dale stood at the front with his arms crossed. On the wall behind him, someone had tacked up a hand-drawn park map from 1987 that nobody had bothered to take down because it was accurate enough. His team was not a military unit. They were not special forces. They carried sidearms for bear encounters, bear spray for closer encounters, and radios for everything else. What they had, 26 years in Yellowstone had built in Dale and filtered into every ranger under him, was something that no alien intelligence report could fully quantify. They knew this ground, every thermal vent, every trail, every unpredictable patch of thin crust above a boiling mud pool. They knew where the wind shifted at dusk in the Hayden Valley. They knew which roads flooded first after rain, and which bridges looked solid but weren't. They knew where the wolves denned, and where the grizzlies moved in spring, and where tourists always underestimated the distance to the tree line. Yellowstone was not just their workplace. It was their operating environment, and they had been trained to manage chaos in it since day one. Ranger First Class Tom Brierly raised his hand. He was 31, from Cody, Wyoming, and had the kind of calm that came from once delivering a calf beside a highway in a snowstorm while directing traffic with the other hand. "Chief, what exactly are we dealing with?" Dale pointed at the window. The violet seam was visible even from inside. "Unknown." "Non-terrestrial, best I can tell." The room went quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then Ranger Walt Greer, 51, former smoke jumper man who had once hiked 14 miles in the wrong boots because he'd grabbed his girlfriend's by mistake and refused to admit it. Leaned forward. So aliens, that's my working theory, Walt nodded slowly. Okay, do they know about the thermal crust problem near Fountain Paint Pot? Dale looked at him. I doubt it, Walt leaned back. Good. Outside, the first alien descent craft broke through the seam and dropped toward the caldera. It was massive, black hexagonal, covered in glowing geometric lines, and designed, clearly, to be intimidating. It descended with the slow, theatrical confidence of something that had never been told no by a planet before. It landed directly in the middle of a thermal field. The crust held, barely. A geyser 300 meters to the east erupted 6 minutes early in what the park's geological monitoring system logged as a stress response event. Inside the alien craft, the landing crew reviewed their geological data. Their scans had identified Yellowstone as a high-energy geothermal zone, strategically significant, defensible, and sparsely populated. Their intelligence on human defensive capability in the area had returned a minimal threat assessment. They had not flagged the Rangers. This was their first mistake. Their second mistake was setting down between Old Faithful and the Firehole River, which meant they had parked in the single most visited square mile of the entire park, and the Rangers knew every inch of it blindfolded. Dale watched the craft land from the ridge above. He lowered his binoculars. He picked up his radio. All units, we have a landed craft, Northern Thermal Basin, grid reference 447. Nobody moves, nobody approaches, nobody does anything until I say so. A pause, and somebody find out if there are any tourists still in that quadrant. Connors came back. Chief, there's a couple from Ohio who didn't check out of their campsite last night. Dale closed his eyes. Of course there is. Tom's voice came over the radio. Chief, what's the play? Dale looked at the alien craft sitting in the middle of Yellowstone like it owned the place. Then he looked at the thermal field around it. Then he thought about 26 years of managing things that had no business being where they were. Same as always, he said. We assess, we contain, and we make sure nothing stupid happens to the park. He paused. Or to us. Behind him, Walt was already pulling out the terrain maps. Because in Yellowstone, the ground itself was a player, and nobody knew its moves better than the people who'd been reading them for decades. Whatever these aliens thought they had landed on, they were about to find out that Yellowstone had rules, and the Rangers enforced them, every single one. The alien commander's name, translated into English by the craft's linguistic processor, came out as something close to Vethkarn of the Assembled Dominion, a title that sounded impressive on 17 worlds, and meant approximately nothing to a man in a flat-brimmed hat, standing on a ridge in Wyoming. Vethkarn was tall, armored in black and deep green, and carried himself with the specific posture of someone who had never once in his life been told that he was parked in the wrong place. He stepped out of his craft onto the thermal basin floor, looked at the landscape around him, and announced, through a translation drone hovering at his shoulder, that the Assembled Dominion claimed this geothermal region as a forward operations base by right of superior technology and galactic standing. Nobody heard him except his own crew. 300 meters away, crouched behind a rock formation near Biscuit Basin, Ranger Tom Brierly heard the translation drones broadcast through the directional audio receiver Dale had passed him from the equipment locker. He wrote 3 words in his field notebook, claims the park. He underlined it twice. Then he keyed his radio very quietly. Chief. They just announced they're claiming Yellowstone. Dale's voice came back flat and even. Noted. How do you want to respond? A pause. The kind of pause that in 26 years Tom had learned meant Dale was doing math in his head, not numbers but variables. Terrain, timing, risk, and outcome. We don't, not yet. Let them get comfortable. Tom looked at the alien commander standing on the thermal crust, boots gleaming, cape. And yes, there was a cape rippling in the Wyoming morning wind. The translation drone hovered. 2 more alien soldiers emerged from the craft, then 4 more. Then what looked like a technical crew carrying equipment Tom didn't have a name for. He noted something else. The commander was standing 6 meters north of a thin-crust thermal zone that Dale had flagged in the seasonal ground survey 2 months ago. The crust there ran about 4 inches over a boiling mud cavity. It would hold an adult male human, It would not hold something the size and weight of an alien commander in full armor. Tom did not say this on the radio. He wrote it in his notebook instead, circled it, and drew a small arrow. Back at Station 7, Dale stood over Walt's terrain map with 3 other rangers. Walt had marked every thermal vent, thin crust patch, geyser cone, hydrothermal pool, and unpredictable mud pot within a 2-mile radius of the landing site. The map looked like a minefield. Because it was, technically, except the mines had been there for 10,000 years and ran on geothermal pressure instead of explosives. They picked the worst possible spot to land, said Ranger Kevin Marsh, 28, who had been with the park for 4 years and still had the specific energy of someone who found every day genuinely interesting. The Northern Thermal Basin has the highest surface instability index in the whole park, Walt nodded, second only to the Mud Volcano area. And they're a quarter mile from a geyser field with 11 active cones. Dale looked at the map. Do they know that? Walt looked up. Chief, tourists with PhDs and park maps don't know that until we tell them. These things just landed. Dale straightened up. Right. He picked up his radio. All units listen up. Nobody fires a single round. Nobody approaches the craft. What I need right now is a full assessment, how many of them, what they're carrying, and where they're walking. A pause. And somebody get eyes on the Ohio couple. Ranger Sandra Cole, yes, the team had 1 woman, and she was the best tracker in the Northern District, came back on the radio. Chief, I found the Ohio couple in their 60s. They're in their RV. They slept through everything. Keep them there. Already on it. Told them there was a bear situation. Dale almost smiled. Good call. Meanwhile, Vethkarn had begun moving his technical crew toward the edge of the geyser field. His geological scanner was reading enormous subsurface energy signatures. In his experience across 14 planets, geothermal energy meant harvestable power. His engineers were already discussing extraction. What his scanner did not have was Yellowstone-specific calibration. It read heat signatures accurately. It read pressure differentials accurately. What it did not understand, what no instrument built by a civilization that had never stood on Yellowstone's specific and deeply personal brand of geological chaos could understand, was the difference between a thermally stable zone and a zone that was stable right now, but would not be in 4 minutes when the pressure cycle completed. Old Faithful knew, the Rangers knew, the ground knew, the alien engineers did not. Tom watched through his binoculars as 2 alien technical crew members walked directly toward Cone 7, a secondary geyser that the park's own data showed erupted every 41 minutes. Last eruption 38 minutes ago. He checked his watch, he did the math, he keyed his radio. Chief, 2 of their technical people are heading toward Cone 7. Dale checked his watch. How long? About 3 minutes. Don't warn them, Tom blinked. Chief, Tom. Have I ever once in 26 years told a grizzly bear not to charge someone who walked into its space without reading the signs? A pause. No, Chief. Nature teaches, we document. Get it on the audio receiver. 2 minutes and 57 seconds later, Cone 7 erupted. It shot a column of boiling water and steam 31 feet into the Wyoming sky with a sound like a freight train clearing its throat. The 2 alien technical crew members were not hit. They had stopped just far enough away. But the eruption was close enough that the translation drone registered what could only be described as a very undignified series of alien vocalizations. One of them dropped their scanner. Back at the craft, Vethkarn turned toward the eruption. His intelligence officer said something. The translation drone relayed it to Tom's receiver. Surface energy discharge, unscheduled, nature-based or defensive. Vethkarn's response, nature-based, continue. Tom wrote that down too. Dale's voice came over the radio, quiet and even. They think it's natural. Walt from back at the station said, it is natural. I know. But they don't know we know the schedule. There was a silence on the radio that lasted about 4 seconds. Then Kevin said, Chief, are we going to use the park against them? Dale picked up his thermos and took a long sip of coffee. Outside the station window, a second alien craft was descending through the seam in the sky, larger than the first, angling toward the Hayden Valley. Kevin, Dale said, we're going to manage them. Same as everything else that shows up in this park without reading the signs. He set down the thermos. Now get me a full geyser schedule for the next 6 hours. Every cone, every vent, every mud pot with a pressure reading above threshold. And somebody tell me where the Hayden Valley herd is this morning. Because if the second craft thought it was going to land in the Hayden Valley, home to the largest bison herd in Yellowstone, without anyone flagging the consequences, then this alien empire was about to have a very educational morning. And Dale Hatch had been educating things that didn't read the signs for 26 years. He was just getting started. The second alien craft landed in the Hayden Valley at 6:02 a.m. The Hayden Valley bison herd numbered 437 animals. They had been grazing the valley floor since before sunrise, moving in their slow, deliberate way across the frost-stiffened grass, breath rising in clouds in the cold morning air. They were, by any reasonable measure, the most dangerous non-geothermal thing in Yellowstone, not because bison were aggressive by nature, but because they were large, unpredictable, and deeply uninterested in the concept of yielding the right of way. The alien craft descended with its engines running at what its designers considered a quiet operational frequency. The bison disagreed. Dale heard it before he saw it, a low rolling sound like thunder that didn't stop. Building from the south end of the valley, and moving north with the specific momentum of 437 animals that had collectively decided they were done with this valley for the morning. Tom's voice came over the radio, slightly breathless. "Chief, herd's moving. Which direction?" "Northeast. Toward the second craft's landing zone." Dale picked up his binoculars from the ridge. In the valley below, the alien craft sat with its landing ramps extended, alien soldiers beginning to disembark in their disciplined formations. They moved well, organized, precise, clearly trained. They had shields, they had weapons, they had the general look of a unit that had successfully intimidated populations on multiple worlds. They had not been briefed on bison. The herd hit the landing zone perimeter at 6:09 a.m., not as an attack, not as a charge directed at the aliens specifically. The bison simply went where they went, as they had always gone, because the valley was their valley, and it had been their valley since long before anyone built anything on it. The alien formation, crisp, geometric, professionally maintained, encountered 437 bison with the structural coherence of a sandcastle meeting a wave. The aliens scattered. Not in panic exactly, these were trained soldiers, but with the specific hurried movement of beings who had looked up their threat database and found nothing under the entry for large ruminant. North American, highly indifferent to rank. From the ridge, Dale watched the alien commander of the second craft attempt to restore formation. His soldiers were backing up in good order. A few had raised weapons. The translation drone from the first landing site was relaying communications. Kevin's voice came over the radio. "Chief, should we?" "No, but the herd is going to." "Kevin, has a bison ever successfully been stopped by telling it no?" A pause. "No, Chief." "Then let the bison do what bison do. Document everything." What the bison did was finish crossing the valley at their own pace, split around the alien craft like water around a stone, and continue north into the tree line with the total lack of concern that was the bison's defining characteristic. 3 alien soldiers had retreated back up the ramps. One had dropped a weapon. A translation drone had been knocked sideways by a bison flank and was spinning in a slow, confused circle 10 feet off the ground. The second alien commander, designation Rethsul, according to what Tom was picking up on the audio receiver, reported to Vethkarn that the landing zone had experienced an unexpected indigenous creature event. Vethkarn asked if the creatures were hostile. Rethsul said they did not appear to be targeting the soldiers specifically. Vethkarn said to continue operations. Dale listened to all of this on the relay from Tom's receiver and added it to the notes he was keeping in his own field book. Not strategy notes, observation notes. The same kind he kept after every significant wildlife interaction, every thermal event, every unusual park incident. Because in Yellowstone, you documented everything because everything was connected, and you never knew which piece of information would matter later. By 6:30 a.m., he had 3 pages of notes and a clearer picture than any military general sitting in a command center far away would have had. He knew where both crafts had landed. He knew the terrain vulnerabilities around each. He knew the geyser schedules. He knew the herd movement patterns. He knew the wind direction, the temperature, and the fact that the afternoon thermal cycle in the northern basin would start increasing ground pressure around 2 p.m. He also knew something else. Something he'd noticed watching the alien soldiers move. They were good in formation. Disciplined, trained, coordinated. But they were operating on flat ground tactics, straight lines, geometric patterns, clear sightlines. They had trained for terrain that made sense. Yellowstone did not make sense. Yellowstone had trails that ended at boiling pools, clearings that were actually unstable crust over steam chambers, ridge lines that looked solid and weren't. Tree cover that concealed thermal features rather than solid ground. The park was not a battlefield. It was something much more complicated, and the Rangers knew every inch of it. Dale called a full team meeting at 7 a.m. in the field, spread across 3 radiolink positions to avoid gathering in one visible location. He laid it out simply. "We are not going to fight these people," he said. "We don't have the equipment for it. What we have is something better." He paused. "We have home advantage. We know this ground and they don't. We know the schedules, the cycles, the pressure points. We know what happens at 11 a.m. near Norris Geyser Basin. We know what the mud pots do after a cold night. They have technology we don't understand. We have 26 years of Yellowstone management they don't have a file on." Tom's voice. "So we manage them like the park." "Exactly. Walt, Chief, they've got soldiers, real ones." "What happens when they decide to stop being managed?" Dale looked at the northern ridge, where the first craft still sat in the thermal basin. And the alien commander was presumably planning his next move. "Then we make sure the park is an extremely unpleasant place to be unmanaged in," Dale said. "And we do it without breaking a single regulation." Kevin, very quietly, "Chief, that is the most Ranger thing I have ever heard." Dale picked up his radio. "Tom, I need you to move to grid 449 and get eyes on the thermal vent cluster northeast of the first craft. Walt, you're going to the Norris approach. I want to know if any of them start moving that direction. Kevin, stay with the Ohio couple and make sure they stay put." A pause. "Any questions?" Silence on the radio, the good kind. The kind that meant everyone understood and was already moving. In the Hayden Valley, the alien soldiers were attempting to re-establish formation after the bison. In the northern basin, Vethkarn was sending a technical team toward what his scanners told him was a significant subsurface energy reservoir. His scanners were right. There was a massive energy reservoir beneath that section of the basin. What his scanners could not tell him was that the reservoir was connected to a pressure system that had been building for 6 days. That the surface crust above it was already showing microfracture patterns that Dale had flagged in his last survey report, and that at some point in the next 4 hours, something very loud and very wet was going to happen whether anyone wanted it to or not. Dale had the survey report in his field book. He'd written it himself. He tucked the book into his vest pocket and started walking. There was a lot of park to manage this morning. And the morning was just getting interesting. At 9:14 a.m., Vethkarn made the decision that changed everything. He sent 30 soldiers toward Ranger Station 7. It wasn't aggression exactly, not yet. It was reconnaissance in force, the kind of move a commander makes when he's been in place for 4 hours. Nothing has attacked him, and he wants to know why. The silence had bothered him. The absence of military response had bothered him more. A civilization that had radio towers and road infrastructure and geothermal monitoring systems did not just ignore an alien landing. Something was watching. He wanted to find it. His intelligence officer had flagged a structure on the scanner, small, wooden, radio-equipped, northeast of the thermal basin. A human operational station of some kind. Vethkarn sent 30 soldiers to investigate and, if possible, take it intact. Dale heard them coming 12 minutes before they arrived. Not because of any sophisticated sensor. Because Tom had eyes on the thermal basin and counted them moving out. And because Walt, positioned at the Norris approach, reported the direction of march. And because Dale knew every trail and game path between the thermal basin and Station 7. And he knew exactly which Route 30 beings in heavy alien armor would take through that terrain. He had 11 Rangers against 30 alien soldiers. He didn't need to beat them. He needed to redirect them. All units pull back from Station 7. Leave everything as is, radios on, lights on, door open. Make it look occupied. He paused. Then get to your secondary positions. Tom's voice. Chief, secondary positions are in the thermal field. I know. I know, Tom. Trust the ground. Secondary positions in Yellowstone Ranger doctrine were established during wildfire management. places a ranger could be when a fire moved through that would survive the fires. Path. Dale had adapted the concept. Secondary positions for this morning were locations where the rangers could operate, and the alien soldiers, following their tactical training, would not go because their tactical training would tell them the terrain was unstable. It was unstable, that was the point. The rangers knew exactly how unstable, which meant they knew exactly where the stable patches were within the unstable zones. The alien soldiers did not. The 30-soldier column moved through the pine forest northeast of the thermal basin. They moved well, proper formation, scouts forward, flanks covered. Their armor registered thermal signatures, and the landscape lit up on their displays like a fever chart. Hot zones everywhere. Their squad leader ordered caution near high heat readings. What he did not know was that the rangers were in the high heat readings, specifically in the narrow bands of stable ground between them. From outside, a thermal scanner saw nothing but dangerous terrain. What it couldn't distinguish was the difference between lethally thin crust and the solid rock shelf that ran beneath it. A shelf Dale had mapped personally after a wildfire had exposed the geology. 3 years ago, the alien column slowed at the edge of the thermal field. Standard tactical doctrine, don't advance into uncertain terrain without reconnaissance. Their squad leader sent 2 scouts forward to assess. The scouts stepped onto the thermal field edge. The crust held it was solid at the edge. They advanced 3 meters, still solid. They reported back, passable. The squad leader began to move the column forward. At that moment, a geyser cone 40 meters to the east, cone 14, which Dale had on his schedule for 9:31 a.m., erupted. It was not aimed at anyone. Geysers don't aim. But it was loud, it was sudden, and it was directly between the column's current position and Station 7. The column halted. The scouts scrambled backward. The squad leader called Vethkarn on his radio. Dale listened to the exchange on Tom's audio relay. The squad leader reported a thermal energy discharge blocking the advance route. Vethkarn asked if it was defensive. The squad leader said it appeared natural. Vethkarn said to wait for it to subside and find an alternate route. Dale checked his geyser schedule. Cone 14's eruption would last approximately 4 minutes. The next cone in the sequence was Cone 9, which was directly on the alternate route the alien column would logically choose. Cone 9 was scheduled for 9:38 a.m. Dale pulled out his radio. Tom, get me eyes on the column. Walt, hold it Norris. Kevin, how's the Ohio couple? Kevin's voice came back, barely above a whisper. Chief, they woke up and they want to know if they can take pictures. Dale closed his eyes. Tell them absolutely not and give them a park brochure to read. Kevin, already on the second brochure, Chief. The alien column found the alternate route at 9:33 a.m. It led around the eastern edge of Cone 14's active zone, through a clear-looking stretch of ground that the squad leader's scanner showed as thermally moderate. It was thermally moderate. It was also the approach corridor for Cone 9's runoff channel, a shallow depression that, during an eruption, would carry about 2,000 gallons of hot water down its length in under 90 seconds. Tom's voice, Chief, they're in the runoff channel. Dale checked his watch. How many? Looks like the whole column. 5 minutes. Dale keyed the radio. All units stay on high ground. This is about to get educational. At 9:38 a.m., Cone 9 erupted. The water column went up 40 feet. The runoff surged down the channel. The alien column did not run. They were trained soldiers, and trained soldiers do not break formation for water. But alien armor, it turned out, had drainage ports that were not designed for the specific mineral content of Yellowstone hydrothermal water. Because no alien armor designer had ever had reason to account for it. The column moved through the runoff. They made it. Nobody was hurt. But their scanner array, worn as chest units on the armor, was now thoroughly coated in silica-laced water, and 3 of the units were reporting calibration errors. Their thermal mapping was degraded. They no longer had accurate ground temperature readings. They did not know this immediately. They recalibrated and kept moving, reading the corrected output as accurate. It wasn't. Dale watched their approach change direction on his mental map. They were now moving on bad data, reading stable ground where there were hot zones, reading hot zones where there was solid rock. Not catastrophically wrong, not wrong enough to walk someone into a fatal situation, but wrong enough to make their movement unpredictable. Unpredictable movement in Yellowstone was a problem the park usually managed with signage. Dale was about to manage it differently. He stood up from his position on the rock shelf, stepped onto the trail above the thermal field, and walked out into the open where the alien column's forward scout could see him. He was wearing his flat-brimmed hat. He had his radio in one hand and his field book in the other. He looked exactly like what he was, a park ranger doing his job. The scout froze, then raised a weapon. Dale stopped walking. He held up the hand with the field book. "Good morning," he said at normal volume, clearly into the cold Wyoming air. "I'm going to need you to stop right there." The translation drone relayed it. The column stopped. 30 alien soldiers, armed and armored, standing in the middle of Yellowstone National Park, looking at one man in a hat. Dale looked at the drone, then passed it toward the column. "You're in a restricted zone," he said. "I'm going to have to ask you to step back about 20 meters. There was a pause on the alien side that lasted about 4 seconds. Then the squad leader said something the drone translated as, "Who are you?" Dale looked at him. "I'm the chief ranger," he said. "And this is my park." The alien squad leader stared at Dale for approximately 5 seconds. His name, according to the translation drone's identification tag, was Subcommander Ketal, a designation that meant something significant within the assembled Dominion's rank structure, and meant nothing at all to a man who had once cited a bull elk for blocking. A federal roadway. Ketal raised his weapon. Dale did not step back. He looked at the weapon, then at the soldier holding it, with the specific expression of a person who has spent 26 years dealing with things far less predictable than a soldier following orders, and has developed, over that time, a very high tolerance for being pointed at. "I've asked you to step back," Dale said. "That's not a suggestion." The translation drone processed it. Ketal said something in response that the drone rendered as, "You are one individual. We are 30 armed personnel. You will stand aside or be neutralized." Dale looked at him for a moment, then he looked at his field book. He turned to a specific page, the geyser schedule, and ran his finger down it. Then he looked back up. "You're standing about 8 meters north of an active thermal vent that runs under your current position," he said. "Your scanners are reading it wrong because of the silica coating from Cone 9's runoff, which you walked through about 12 minutes ago." He paused. "If you'd like to test whether I'm correct, you're welcome to stay where you are. Pressure cycle completes in about 4 minutes. The drone relayed it. Ketal did not move. But 2 of the soldiers behind him shifted their weight. The small, instinctive shift of people who have just been told the ground beneath them might not be what they thought it was. 4 minutes passed. Dale stood and waited with the patience of a man who had spent significant portions of his career waiting for things to happen on geological time. At minute 3 and 50 seconds, the thermal vent beneath Ketal's position released a pressure pulse. Not a full eruption, the vent wasn't a geyser cone. It was a fumarole, but it produced a sharp hiss of steam from the ground cracks 6 feet from the column's right flank and a burst of sulfurous heat that the alien armor registered immediately. The column stepped back, not in panic professionally, but they stepped back. Dale nodded. "Thank you." He raised his radio. "Tom, they're pulling back from grid 447. "What's Vethkarn doing?" Tom's voice was quiet and precise. "Chief, he's moving toward the western ridge with what looks like a command element, maybe 12 personnel. Heading looks like Firehole River crossing." Dale checked his mental map. The Firehole River at this time of year and this time of morning ran fast and cold from snowmelt upstream. The crossing point Vethkarn was heading toward looked, from above or from a scanner, like a standard shallow ford. What the scanner would not show was the drop in the river bottom 6 meters downstream of the ford, a hole carved by a hydrothermal upwelling that made the depth unpredictable and the current irregular. Locals called it the Firehole Surprise. Rangers put a sign on it every summer. Tourists ignored the sign approximately once per week. "Let him reach the ford," Dale said. "Walt, can you get to the East Bank crossing point ahead of them?" "Walt, already moving, Chief. Don't stop them. Just be visible when they get there." Walt's voice carried the dry tone of someone who understood the plan. "Just standing there doing nothing as usual." "That's the job, Walt." Meanwhile, at Station 7, which the alien column had been approaching, Vethkarn had redirected his intelligence officer to analyze the structure remotely. The intelligence officer reported, Radio equipment, geological monitoring systems, supply stores, operational maps, no visible weapons. Vethkarn had ordered it secured. But now his column was delayed in the thermal field, and his own command element was approaching the river. He reached the ford at 10:47 a.m. and found Walt standing on the near bank, hands in his vest pockets, looking at the water with the expression of a man who had absolutely nowhere else to be. Walt was 61 years old. He had a gray beard and hands that looked like they'd been carved from the same material as the park's rock formations. He looked at the alien command element approaching the bank without changing his expression at all. Vethkarn's translation drone activated. "Stand aside, human." Walt looked at the drone. Then at Vethkarn, then at the river. "Wouldn't cross there," he said. The drone relayed it. Vethkarn said, "We will determine that ourselves." Walt shrugged. "Suit yourself." One of Vethkarn's forward scouts stepped into the ford. The water was knee-deep cold, moving at speed. He crossed 4 meters and hit the hydrothermal upwelling zone. The current doubled without warning. His footing went. He went sideways, caught himself. Alien armor was good for that, heavy and stable, but he was clearly off balance, scanning the water with sudden focus. Vethkarn raised a hand. "Column halt." He looked at Walt. Walt had not moved, had not smiled, just watched. "Why did you warn us?" The drone translated. Walt thought about it. "Because my job is to protect people in this park," he said. "Even when they're being unreasonable about it." The drone took a moment with that. Vethkarn stared at Walt for a long time. Then he said something to his intelligence officer, who said something back, and the exchange went on for almost a minute, quiet and rapid, before the drone spoke again. "Your commander." "I will speak with your commander." Walt picked up his radio without looking away. "Chief, he wants to talk." Dale's voice came back. "Tell him I'm busy." Walt relayed it with a completely straight face. The drone translated. Vethkarn's posture changed. Not anger, something closer to disbelief. "Your commander is too busy to speak with the commander of an assembled Dominion strike force." Walt said, "He's managing the park." The silence that followed was the kind that happens when a concept doesn't translate well across civilizations. Then Vethkarn said, very carefully through his drone, "What precisely is he managing?" Walt looked across the river, then at the alien command element, then back at the water. "You mostly," he said, "but also a couple from Ohio." Back in the thermal basin, Dale was doing exactly that. He had moved to a high point above the first landing site and was watching the alien technical crew still attempting to assess the subsurface energy reservoir. They had been at it for 4 hours. They had not made progress because every time they positioned equipment, the thermal cycle shifted the ground readings, and they had to reposition. It wasn't sabotage. It was just Yellowstone being Yellowstone. But Vethkarn's technical crew had been out in Wyoming morning, whether in armor not designed for sustained outdoor operations in variable temperature conditions for those same 4 hours. Their equipment was running hot. Their operators were running tired. And one of the 11 active geyser cones in the northern basin was now 6 minutes from its pressure peak. Dale raised his radio to his mouth. "Tom, get me the geological monitor reading on the northern basin central pressure system." Tom's voice came back immediately. "Chief, it's at 92% of the cycle peak. Reading's been climbing for the last 40 minutes. When does it break? At the current rate, 11 minutes. Maybe 12. Dale looked at the alien technical crew below him. He looked at where they were positioned. He looked at his survey map. Then he picked up his radio on the park emergency frequency. Not the tactical channel, not the ranger-to-ranger channel, but the public emergency broadcast frequency that every radio in the park was required to monitor. He clicked it twice to make sure it was live. Then he said, clearly and calmly, as if he were doing a routine visitor safety announcement, "Attention all personnel in the northern thermal basin. This is Chief Ranger Hatch. The area around grid reference 451 is entering an active pressure event. All personnel are advised to move to established safe zones, marked with yellow boundary markers immediately." He paused. "This applies to everyone currently in the basin." The translation drone, floating near the alien technical crew, rendered it into Dominion language automatically. Because translation drones are designed to translate everything in their operational range, and Dale's broadcast was, technically, within range. The alien technical crew looked at each other, then at their commander's signal channel, then at the ground. Then they began. with what Dale would later describe in his incident report as reasonable efficiency, moving toward the established boundary markers, the yellow posts the park had placed around the active zone. Perimeter. They did not know what the markers meant specifically, but they were moving away from the center of a thermal field after a human official had just announced a pressure event, and whatever else was happening this morning. Yellowstone had already demonstrated that it did not make idle threats. Dale watched them go. He noted it in his field book. Then he waited for 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Then the Northern Basin's central pressure system released. It was not the largest eruption Yellowstone's monitoring history had recorded. It was not even in the top 20. But it was significant enough that the alien technical crew, standing at the boundary markers, felt it through their boots. The equipment they had left in the central zone was thrown sideways. One scanner unit was buried under 3 feet of ejected thermal material. Nobody was hurt. Dale wrote that down too. Then he keyed the radio. All units. What's our status? Tom. Column is pulled back from the thermal field, Chief. They're regrouping south of Cone 14. Kevin, Ohio couple is on their 4th park brochure. The husband wants to know if the aliens are part of a summer event. Walt. Vethkarn is standing at the river crossing and not crossing it. His translation drone has been asking me questions for 20 minutes. Dale nodded slowly. What kind of questions? Walt's voice carried something that might have been amusement, very carefully kept under control. Chief, he wants to know who designed the park. Dale looked out across the thermal basin. The steam was still rising. The geysers were still running their schedules. The bison were somewhere in the valley. The Ohio couple was reading brochures. His rangers were in position. He keyed the radio one more time. Tell him nobody designed it, Dale said. Tell him it was already here. We just learned to work with it. A pause, then Walt said he wants to know how long that took. Dale thought about it. Still working on it, he said. And somewhere on the other side of the river, a very experienced alien commander looked at the ranger standing on the bank, and then at the landscape surrounding him, and did something his intelligence files would later describe as highly unusual for a Dominion commander in a contested zone. He sat down. The formal surrender, if it could be called that, happened at 2:17 p.m. in the parking lot of the Old Faithful Visitor Center, which Dale had chosen because it had a concrete pad stable enough to hold alien armor and enough open space that nobody was going to step into anything problematic. Vethkarn of the assembled Dominion sat across a folding table from Chief Ranger Dale Hatch. Between them were 2 thermoses of coffee, Dale's contribution, and a Yellowstone National Park visitor map, also Dale's contribution. Because he'd circled every active thermal zone in red marker and felt it was the responsible thing to do. It was not a military ceremony. There was no documentation of victory, no signing of anything, no flags. Dale was not authorized to conduct international, or, as it turned out, interstellar negotiations. He had already radioed that to Federal Emergency Management, who had radioed it to the Department of the Interior, who had connected it to someone at the State Department, who had apparently said, hold on, and not come back yet. So Dale did what Rangers did when the official process was still catching up. He managed the situation. Your technical team's equipment is recoverable, he said. The stuff buried in the thermal event, we can get to it after the ground temperature drops, probably tomorrow morning. We've done equipment recovery in active zones before. Bison horns, tourist cameras, one very unfortunate drone. Vethkarn's translation drone rendered it. The commander looked at the visitor map with its red circles for a long moment. Your land is actively hostile to structures. It's actively geological, Dale said. There's a difference. The park isn't trying to destroy your equipment. It just doesn't adjust its schedule for it. And you live here. We work here, different thing. Vethkarn looked at him. You are not a military commander. No, you are not a soldier. No, then what are you? Dale picked up his thermos, thought about it, and poured himself another coffee. I'm the guy who's been here the longest, he said. And who knows this ground the best. The alien commander was quiet for a while. Outside the visitor center, Tom and Walt were conducting a professional and entirely calm escort of the alien soldiers toward the parking area, where they were being asked, politely, to stack their weapons on the designated equipment area, which Walt had marked with a set of orange traffic cones from the ranger station storage room. Most of the soldiers complied. One didn't until Walt explained, still politely, still calmly, that the alternative was standing in the thermal field while Dale finished his conversation. And the afternoon pressure cycle was due to start in about 40 minutes. The soldier stacked his weapon. Kevin had managed to move the Ohio couple's RV to the south entrance parking area, well away from everything, and had told them, truthfully, that they had witnessed something historic. The husband had taken exactly one photograph of the second alien craft in the Hayden Valley, from a distance of about half a mile. Before Kevin had very gently suggested that the park's photography regulations around wildlife and geological features might technically apply here too. The husband, to Kevin's genuine surprise, had accepted this immediately and put the camera away. "Man, you guys really run a tight ship," he'd said. Kevin had not disagreed. The federal response arrived at 4 p.m. in the form of 3 government vehicles, 2 people in suits who did not give their names, and a military liaison officer named Colonel Reed who looked at Dale's field notes, the geyser schedule, the thermal survey map, the incident log, and the prisoner list, 22 alien soldiers plus 1 alien commander, seated in the visitor center parking lot. Drinking water from park issue bottles because apparently alien physiology was reasonably compatible with Wyoming mountain water, and said, very carefully, "Did you just manage first contact with the geological features of a national park?" Dale considered the question. "I managed the park," he said. "They were in it." Colonel Reed looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Walt, who was leaning against the ranger station wall drinking coffee. Then at Tom, who was updating the incident log on a clipboard. Then at Kevin, who was handing the Ohio couple a complimentary annual pass because, as he put it, they'd had an unusual morning. Then the colonel looked back at Dale. "Chief Ranger," he said, "I've been briefed on a lot of first contact scenarios over my career. This is not how any of them went. How did they go?" The colonel thought about it. "More shooting, less thermal event management." Dale nodded. "Less productive, I'd imagine." In the visitor center, Vethkarn was sitting alone with the park map, still looking at the red circles. His intelligence officer, Reth Sewell, who had arrived from the Hayden Valley looking like someone who had spent a morning being managed by the landscape and wasn't sure how to log it, sat nearby. "The human called this a park," Vethkarn said. "Yes, Captain. A designated territory set aside specifically because the land is too volatile to be built upon." "That appears to be part of the definition, yes, and they put signs on it." "Correct." Vethkarn looked at one of the visitor brochures that had been left on the table. On the cover was a photograph of Old Faithful erupting under a blue sky with the caption, "Yellowstone, America's first national park, over 10,000 thermal features." He set it down. "They walked us through their own geological weapon," he said slowly, and called it hospitality. Reth Sewell did not answer that, because there was no answer to it that would help anything. Outside, Dale was walking the perimeter of the parking lot with Tom. The alien crafts were quiet. The thermal basin was doing what it always did. The bison were somewhere being bison. Old Faithful had erupted twice since morning and would erupt again in approximately 89 minutes, as scheduled. "Think they'll come back?" Tom asked. Dale looked at the northern ridge where the steam still rose in steady columns against the afternoon sky. "Probably," he said. "Things come back, bears come back, tourists come back." He paused. "We'll manage it." Tom looked at him. "Chief, we just held off an alien invasion with geyser schedules and bison." Dale picked up his thermos. "And coffee." Tom allowed this. "And coffee." Dale looked at the park around him, 26 years of it. 2 million acres of the most complicated, beautiful, unmanageable, geologically active ground on the continent, on Earth, as far as anyone had known until about 6 hours ago. He had spent his adult life learning it, and he was still learning it, and he suspected he would be learning it until the day he retired, and probably after that. He had a saying he'd never put in writing anywhere because it sounded too simple and he'd never found the right moment for it. The park teaches. You just have to pay attention. He tucked the field book back in his vest pocket. "All right," he said, "let's go check on those coffee filters." As the sun moved west across Wyoming, the alien craft sat quiet in the thermal basin, surrounded by a landscape that had been doing exactly what it wanted to do for 10,000 years. The Rangers went back to work because work didn't stop even on days like this. Surveys needed updating, equipment needed checking, an incident report of several hundred pages needed writing. Kevin gave the Ohio couple a personally signed copy of the Yellowstone Visitor Guide and sent them on their way. The husband shook his hand and said it was the best vacation of his life. His wife agreed. Kevin waved them off and went back to his shift. Briggs's newsletter, which somehow already existed and had already been shared by Tom via satellite radio to 3 other ranger stations, had a headline that read, "Alien Empire Encounters Park Regulations. Nature wins, coffee survives." Dale found it in his inbox at 6 p.m. and read it twice. Then he printed one copy and put it in the station's operational file under Unusual Incidents, a folder that was, at this point, fairly thick. The federal team took over the formal process after dark. Negotiations, protocols, communications with whoever was on the other end of the alien command chain. Dale left them to it. It was their jurisdiction now. He had maintained the park through the event, protected the resources, kept everyone safe, and filed the paperwork. That was the job. That had always been the job. He sat on the steps of Station 7 at 8 p.m. with his last thermos of the day, watching the stars come out over Wyoming. Somewhere up there, past the seam that had already begun to close, an alien empire was presumably revising its threat assessments and its geological survey protocols. In his field book in the notes column on the last page, Dale had written one line. "Ground advantage is not a strategy, it's a relationship." He finished his coffee. He stood up. He went back inside to finish the incident report. The park was quiet. Old Faithful would erupt again in 44 minutes. The bison were settled for the night. The coffee filters had survived. All things considered, it had been a normal Yellowstone morning, just with better stories. If you made it this far, you're one of us. Drop a comment below telling me what you think the aliens put in their after-action report about Yellowstone. Share this with someone who needs a good story today. And subscribe, because the next one is already coming, and trust me, the park has more secrets than one morning can hold.